Big surprise. Okay, and then Nick also will talk about how unique we are here in Maine in terms of who we send to Washington, and also why he's visiting our great state. Nick.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm Nick Carnes. I grew up in a little town in Kansas called Pittsburgh. It's in the southeast corner, and spent sort of most of my life before I was Professor Carnes, working in restaurants, in a Pepsi bottling plant. I have the distinction of having been fired for trying to unionize the world's largest Walmart at the time, which was in Olathe, Kansas. And as I've told a few people here already, when you walk up to your manager and you hand them a petition to unionize the world's largest Walmart, it takes about 35 minutes for them to fire you. What I found. But if you don't make a scene, they let you keep the blue vests. This was sort of my life before I was an academic. I went to college at the University of Tulsa, and I thought political science was just really for me, and so I sort of kept going with it, and I got into graduate school at Princeton, and I got into this PhD program in political science there, and so I get to Princeton, and it's a whole other world. It was only the second time I'd been to the East Coast in my life, and the first person I met was also I was a college senior and he was a college senior, and we were both about to graduate, and I was going to go to grad school there, and he was going to go. What are you going to go off and do? And he said, "Oh, probably just go back to Hawaii and manage some of my parents' hotels." And I said, "Boy, I'm in a whole different world." While I was there, I started to realize that on paper, politically, I looked a lot like my classmates. We would say we identified with the same party, but there were a lot of issues that I wouldn't budge on, that they would absolutely, if we talked about minimum wage, sure, but, if we talked about unions, very different perspectives. And so I got interested in I started to say, well, gosh, a lot of these Princeton folks are going to go on to be politicians themselves. I wonder, just how common, just how often people from the working class get into office. And so I started collecting data. I'm a quantitative researcher. And the stuff I found was pretty shocking to me. Probably a lot of you know this already, but if millionaires were to form a political party, just a millionaires only party, that party would be about 3% of American families, but it would have a majority in the U.S. House, super majority in the Senate. You can't filibuster the millionaires party in the Senate because they've got more than 60. It would have a 5-4 majority on the Supreme Court, and it would have a man in the White House. So if the millionaires party ever gets its act together, watch out. So when I was in graduate school, so for basically the last 8 years, I've been researching whether it matters that there are no working class people in political office, and that politicians are so much better off than the people they represent. So I just did what political scientists do. I went out and collected all the hard data I could on this question, and every time I analyzed a new data set, I kept getting the same answer over and over again, which is people from the working class who get into political office, whether it's state legislature, whether it's city council, whether it's Congress, they really do bring a different perspective to the process. There's sort of this old argument out there that says, well, a rising tide lifts all boats. We all kind of want the same thing, so what's the harm in letting the business owners call the shots if we all want growth? And what I was finding over and over again is that the shortage of working class people in political office really had serious consequences. There's sort of a whole crowd in Washington and in Raleigh, so I live in North Carolina now. There are a lot of people who are really worried about the fact that rich people have so much more of a voice in the political process. But when I talk to them right now, they're really talking about two solutions. Number one, can we get the money out of politics? So there's too much money. Rich people have more of a voice because they can buy influence with lobbyists and with campaign donations. And number two, can we get more working people to the polls? So if there wasn't so much money and if voting were more equal, The rich wouldn't have as much of a voice in the political process, and I think both of those points are absolutely true. But the message that I'm trying to share with people is that even if you get all the money out of Washington, and even if you make get voter turnout up to 100%, if you let millionaires decide how to tax millionaires, if you let people who have always had health insurance decide whether or not to help people who don't have health insurance, that's always going to tilt policy outcomes in favor of what's good for the haves and what's devastating for people who don't have as much. And so that's sort of the where my research has taken me the last few years. Now, I'm really excited to be here in Maine, and I actually remember when I was in graduate school, I was looking at this data set. It was collected by the Insurance Information Institute of America, this group that represented insurance companies, and they went in 1979. They looked at every state legislature and looked at the occupational makeup of the state legislature, and there was one. And the percentage of working class people in the state legislature was one of the things they collected. And there's this one state, and I remember my advisor saying, that's got to be a fluke. 19% working class. You know, the next highest state was 5%. That's got to, someone, you know, they meant 1%, not 19. That's a typo. Maine. And I went, and sure enough, 1979, Maine was almost 1 in 5 state lawmakers were people who had done manual labor or service industry jobs immediately before they got into politics. And so I've always been interested in what exactly makes this state so unique, because so in North Carolina in 2012, I talked about this earlier today, I went through my entire ballot, and there wasn't a single person from the working class on my ballot. I didn't have a choice. When I went to the polls, it had already been decided for me that I was only going to vote for white-collar candidates. My choices for the House of Representatives were a lawyer and a CEO. I didn't have a Mike Michaud. My choices for state senate were a real estate executive and a Duke University administrator. I didn't have a Troy Jackson on my ballot. And so I'm really excited to be here in Maine to find out, so in my capacity tonight, I'm, I think, more of a student than a teacher. I want to know more about why it is that this state stands out from the rest of the country in terms of political representation, the political voice of working people. Now, I'm still not happy. 19% is good, but I want to see something more along the lines of working class people's representation in the country as a whole. So according to the latest census numbers, manual laborers, service industry workers still make up more than half of the labor market. We're still fundamentally a working class country, and I want to know how we can start to promote working class people at every level of government and increase the percentage of policymakers all over the country who are from the working class. So I want to know how Maine got to 19% and how we can get every state in the country, and for that matter, our members of Congress, even higher than that. So I'll stop there, and I'm really looking forward to talking to all of you.
Well, those are very timely questions, and actually that's a great lead into the next segment of our discussion this evening, and that is I'd like each of our speakers, including Nick, the panelists and Nick, to talk about roughly about 10 minutes each, and to focus on these key questions. First of all, what do you feel are the barriers that prevent the working class people from running for office? How can we break down those barriers? And what specific steps can we take? What strategies and steps need to be adopted to get this constructive change? And why don't we lead off with Nicole? Not to put you on the spot.
Well, yeah. I think, can I make a suggestion? I think it might be fun to just kind of have a discussion.
Sure.
I don't know. Taking I feel barriers that prevent working class people from running for office. I mean, just the people that I talk to, the people that I've worked with, they don't think they have the time or the money or the confidence to run for office, right? I think confidence is a big part of it, that they might not think that they know enough, or that, you know, how could they run against a banker for a Senate seat if they're a mill worker, you know, and that it takes some of the, how, you know, we work on breaking down those barriers and steps that can be taken, is, you know, education and training and confidence building, and, you know, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman or a working class person, I think, or an upper class person, you have to be asked multiple times to run for office, and so identifying people who will be good public servants and asking them and asking them and asking them to run for office. Like somebody earlier today made a good point. I think it might have been you, Nick, that was like wary of the person who doesn't need to be asked to run for office. Like, I should be a senator. No, you shouldn't. That's a little, you know. So, I mean, I'd love to hear, like, people who are around and doing organizing.
Don't say it quite like that.
You know, in 1979. I wasn't born till.
Well, let me just jump in there. Prior to my going to accept the position at the University of Maine in 1972, I worked for the Maine AFL-CIO. I came up from Massachusetts to help run a political campaign, and we were successful. Although most people in Maine didn't think our candidate, the Democratic candidate, was going to win. He was running against an incumbent who was very well liked, by the way, Governor John Reed, a Republican, who had the audacity to veto a right-to-work bill passed the Republican-dominated House and Senate. And he went up against his own party, and he thought that things like negotiating union security was something that ought to be left to the owners of paper mills and factories and shops and their managements and the workers, that government ought to stay out of it. Sounds like a redo of another argument we're hearing, persistent. And again, that was during a time when there were a number of working people, working class people, who held office at the legislature. And I mentioned one of the reasons for that was, how many employers do you know of who are going to excitedly give you the time off to campaign if you're a mill worker, a shipyard worker, a construction worker, an office worker, so that you can campaign, especially if you're unionized.
Or serve.
Oh, yeah,
the commitment
that's
to
true.
actually
Yeah.
serve. Campaigning is one thing, but then serving is
Yeah.
the rest of it.
And so that's a huge problem. And the paper workers' solution to that, and they're not the only union that would get this language into contracts, but they were the largest. There was one time when the paper industry was the dominant industry in the state of Maine, and it's less than half of its total workforce now than it was, say, in 1970. So they had the opportunity to run and know, as I mentioned earlier, and not be sanctioned. But there are other things at work as well. For example, if you were a working class candidate and you were running for the legislature, say from over in Norwich Walk or South Paris or Norway, Maine, where there was a lot of small shoe shops, it was, and I had the chance to work on some campaigns in the late 60s, starting with the 66 campaign of a gubernatorial candidate. And it was very interesting because mill owners, shoe mills, shoe factories, they really didn't even want people voting. I think that's true today. But they had interesting ways of influencing that. And the one that was dominant in the places I just mentioned, Norway, South Paris, Norwich Walk, where there was a lot of shoe factories in particular, I think they probably all got together and figured this out. But, you know, the polls opened at 8 and closed at 8. And that's been pretty much the way it's been for a number of years. And what they would do is, the shoe factory management or owners. Back in those days, there were more owners than there were, you know, on-site management people managing the enterprise for the sake of the owners who live somewhere else. And they would have the workers come in early, 7 o'clock. We've got a big order we got to get out, come in early. And then when it approached 5 o'clock, when workers ordinarily would leave the shop and go vote, they would offer premium time to work so we can get this order out. Well, you know, if you're a shoe worker, you were paid on the piece rate to begin with, unionized or not. And the shoe industry was fairly heavily unionized back in those days. And what shoe worker was going to pass up the opportunity to work 4 or 5 more hours and get premium time, which the rate was time and a half? That, you know, all of a sudden, this is a big opportunity. It's like, you know, just money coming out of the sky. And they didn't mind working, but this meant more money for them. So they wouldn't go vote, even if a family member was running for office. They wouldn't go vote, because that opportunity to earn a significant, not just more money in terms of hourly or piece rates, but time and a half rates. Time, you know, everything was 1.5 times what it ordinarily would be.
And do you think things like that are what spurred more working class people to run and serve in office in the late 60s and the 70s? Or, because I mean, what's happened between 1980 and today? Because what would you say the makeup of the Senate and the House are today? It's like blue collar working class people, so people without, you know, higher education. I can't think of many
that don't have it, or
that are like
yeah,
blue
no, I think
collar
most
service industry manual labor people. I mean, most.
There's definitely, you know, some. I mean, like John was saying, I've served with a number of paper makers that had that provision in their contract that they had the ability to run for legislature, but most of those have been bargained out, well taken away here recently. I can think of Senator Patrick, Senator Bryant, all those. When I first met them, you know, they were able to serve in the legislature and not worry about their jobs at the mills, but that's all gone now. They've taken that away. And the other thing John was talking to, you know, we've seen in the 125th was the same day voter registration, you know, making sure that people couldn't come in and register to vote. Along with that, they took away the ability to absentee vote after Thursday at 5 o'clock. You know, I find that's a big problem for people in my industry. You know, Tuesday voting is just, when they changed that law the first year after, I had to vote, I can't remember now, I'd have to retrace it, but I had to vote like 11 days before the election to make sure that I was able to vote, because I knew I wouldn't be down that Thursday night out of the woods, because we stay in a logging camp. And everyone else in the logging camp with me, there was 15 of us, everyone else in there wasn't able to vote because we were there until 6 o'clock Thursday night. You know, those type of policies make it hard for working class people to be able to vote. I mean, you know, if there was a way to be able to have elections on Saturdays or something like that, you might see a bigger percentage of workers being able to vote. You know, just like I said with the legislature, you know, I would love to see the legislature be in on Saturdays, you know, so that more people could come and testify on the hearings. You know, I mean, we're continually, you know, every once in a while you'll get an issue that'll bring out a lot of workers, but you know that they've lost a day of work or whatever, and they're not there to, you know, be able to advocate on a constant basis. So, you know, that always bothered me. But I mean, the fact that, you know, we're not there during or we're only there during the week is a real deterrent for workers. But you know, I think, like I said, the other thing here, and I don't know, I'm sure other people know. I mean, I just know the Maine legislature, so for the most part. I mean, I've heard stories about other legislators, but you know, the fact that, you know, we start in January and go to June makes it really hard for someone that has to work for a living, because what do you do, you know, with your job? I mean, you either have to quit or they, you know, get a way to have time off, and then when June comes, you have to try and find, you know, either that job gets picked back up or you have to find other jobs part-time. The next session's even worse. It's, you know, January to April. So it makes it very hard for someone that has to work for a living to find something to fill in the rest of that time of the year, or to find an employer that will allow them to leave during that time. So, you know, I've always, I mean, for my frame of reference, I just thought that was a hard thing. I mean, I basically have to quit work. Luckily for myself, March to June is, you know, normally mud season, so we wouldn't be working anyways. But that first 3 months, you know, I just have to quit. There's no other way for me to do it. And the employers that I work for through the summer know that I'm going to quit. And sometimes I've been laid off early because they found somebody to replace me because they knew that, you know, I was going to have to leave. Some of them have been great about it because they respected what I was trying to do for them. So, you know, we've made it work, but, you know, it's hard. I mean, it really is hard. I mean, my wife is sitting there. She's picked up a lot of the financial burden of what I've been doing. Which is, you know, really great. I appreciate that, and thank her for it. But it is hard for, you know, maybe you know, that's something we're going to talk about later. I hear other legislatures are year-round. I remember my first couple of years in the legislature, we were in a caucus and people were talking about, well, you know, Maine gets, what we get paid here is so little. You know, somebody made that comment enough times, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, you know, it's really not a lot different than what I get paid when I'm in the woods, and plus I get health care, so I'm really not complaining, but a lot of people do. I mean, you know, I think, you know, we make $20,000 over a 2-year period, and a lot of people look at that and just figure, well, you know, there's no way I can do that. For someone that's well off, well, that's maybe pocket money or whatever, so it's not a big problem for them. But for the everyday person that's trying to, you know, support a family or whatever, it's just, you know, extremely hard.